morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it might be, wherever it is you are. We are back again, back home to our Tuesday slot. Good morning,
Back
Christos.
home. I was thinking the other day that we haven't done Mondays have been so busy for the last 6-7 months that yesterday felt really weird. I had to double check the calendar to make sure that we didn't have a stream. And then I didn't know what to do the first 3 hours of the day.
Yeah, I mean,
My life is empty now, and I miss Tuesdays. Tuesdays were fun. Remember, we did our first stream on a Tuesday. It was an ADAL to MSAL migration, and it was so much
that
fun
was
back
our
in July.
first one, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. We should do it again, I think, because our first one was a bit of a rough around the edges kind of an experience.
That's a very generous way to put it.
Yeah, I think we chose the most obscure, weird project that we could find in some old source code because,
Yeah.
surprisingly enough, there's not enough ADAL based projects anymore because we updated all our samples.
That's
So
right.
it
yeah.
came down to let's find something that actually has ADAL and try to migrate, and it was an experience. But
Yeah.
anyway, we should do it
It
again.
was an experience. That's probably the best way to put it. So, yeah. So
Exactly.
we're back on Tuesdays for the next 10 or 12 weeks. The first hour of the show is going to be Identity Crisis, which is sort of a show for startups, show for people who are just getting interested in identity and maybe need to implement some stuff. So it's a series. We've done 3 episodes so far. We're going to get to our 4th one today and talk about the different components. We're going to get out of PowerPoint, which will be nice, and go over to look at some actual pieces that we have in our things. And then at the top of the hour, we are going to be joined by Damien and Sahil, who are going to come and
Sahil, yeah.
Damien's going to talk to us about tokens. He sees a lot of confusion about tokens out in the wild, so I think that'll be a good thing for him, and for him to come and talk to us about it. And Sahil's going to come talk to us about what our supportability folks are doing.
Yeah.
So that'll be really cool too.
We have we're segmentizing. Is that a word? We're segmentizing our stream, so there will be a little bit more structure going forward. You should see some changes, but we're very excited about the new structure. And
Segmenting?
you'll be getting a lot more segmenting. God, man, I need more coffee. You know what? I woke up this morning and it's a rough start. I need coffee, so
Yeah,
we'll do it.
well, and
I'll find my
I don't
verbs.
know if you saw over the weekend, but we were propositioned by one CL Dubois.
We were indeed almost
So-
like a challenge, right?
Yeah, so that's going to be coming up soon,
Challenge.
which I think will be a lot of fun. And we're going to do an identity speed run to see, of all the identity providers out there, which one can we implement the fastest. So I'm feeling pretty confident about that one, though. I don't want to count all the chickens first, but we'll give it a shot at least. And then, so yesterday I was working on a B2C authorization project, so that's going to be out on GitHub. We're going to publish that up soon.
Yes.
And I was talking to the Graph guys yesterday.
Yeah.
And I got to thinking, because we're talking about Graph and all the different things you can do with Graph and whatever. And simultaneously, while we were meeting, my Teams was taking up like 85 gigs of memory. And so I thought, why don't we just go build us a Teams client that is like ultra fast and chat only? Like, obviously we'll still have to use, we'll still have to use Teams for meetings and stuff, but what if we just made like an ultra fast chat app, right?
Yes.
And then that got to the discussion of Electron. And I was like, well, I mean, VS Code is Electron too. So like, obviously Electron can be fast. So then that devolved into a discussion around maybe we should write a Teams plugin for a Teams extension for VS Code.
No.
So that way I can chat and stay on my IDE. Anyway.
There's already one. There's already one supported. Why am I frozen? Oh yeah, I'm moving now. I think there's already one for when you do live share, because they wanted to add voice and chat to the ability to do live share. And there's an extension that plugs in. Now I don't know if they decided to embed it into the actual live share extension, but there was a big discussion there bringing voice and chat or IM to live share.
Interesting.
You might not want to reinvent the wheel, JP.
Well, that's not a. I think if I could just make a Teams client, like a bare bones chat only Teams client for my desktop that's like just completely wicked fast, I'd be totally happy with that. Like we use Discord with the show.
We
and I got some Discords with friends and stuff. And so the thought is like Discord is super fast. Like I'd never have issues. And granted, maybe I'm not in crazy chat rooms where I'd have issues, but so far it I don't know.
So we have Caparino. He's on Microsoft Developer. Good morning to our friends, or afternoon, or happy time zone, wherever you are. We have Aaron Microsoft is saying VS Code has disappointed lately, messed up IntelliSense and what have you. Yeah,
Really?
well, sometimes it's a bit of a challenge. You need to restart to fix it. Which language? Is it .NET or some other language? And Caparino is asking about the announcement. People have not forgotten from Friday when we said there will be a magic an important announcement. C#. Yeah, C# is using OmniSharp, and it is a service running behind the scenes. Sometimes it needs to be restarted because it gets stuck in its own ways. It's an open source project. Feel free to contribute if you feel they can improve the quality.
The announcement's going to come today. We're going to make the announcement. Well, I don't know, though, because Damien might be here for a while. Maybe, you know what we'll do? We'll make the announcement before we start the main show in about 45 minutes. So we'll make the announcement at like 15 minutes before the top of the hour. How about that?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. See, we're hyping up so much, everybody's going to be disappointed.
Is this the big announcement, MSFT Viva?
No, it's definitely not.
No, we're not Viva affiliated. How about that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think from what I can tell, Viva is like 5 or 6 existing things all sort of stuffed together, right? Like, I don't think it's a net new product. It's a net new brand, maybe?
It's a dashboard. I think it's becoming very big these days. Like there are other products out there that will bring your Slack and your Teams and your PowerPoints and your documents all in one workspace, so you don't have to chase around. I think Viva is the Microsoft equivalent of getting all the different features and products that you use and put them into one product or dashboard, if you want to call it, an aggregator. I think it's an aggregator of all these tools.
Or cynically, it's a way to sell things that people don't use today with things that people do sell.
Dude, we're a Microsoft developer and learn. Don't forget that.
I forgot. My bad. It's all good.
It's fine.
It's okay. No, but it's not a big deal. Not a big deal. Okay. Anyway, all right. Well, let's get in. So we're gonna do.
Oh, we have our friend,
boy.
Bold Bearded Builder here. God, don't believe the hype. It's marketing. It's marketing. It's a marketing tactic.
It isn't. I swear. It's actually, in our opinion, it is. In our opinion, it is. Wait, Bolt, are you calling us the virtual commute? Like when we sit around here and BS for 20 minutes? Is that the virtual commute? Anyway, I think it's. I'm actually really excited to tell everybody. So, like, I think Christmas is too. Like, it's going to be a big deal. Well, it's a big deal to us. If it's a big deal,
it's a big deal for us. Yes, exactly. It might be totally inconsequential to your lives or your projects, but we are very excited about this thing that we have to announce. I almost gave it away.
I'm not expecting, although I can see how
we're not expecting. God, no. Also, it wouldn't be a joint announcement. I mean, I wouldn't be excited about. I would be excited if JP was expecting, but I don't know. Like, is it a genuine excitement?
I have 3 kids already. I do not need a 4th. 3 is enough.
The limit.
All right.
We stopped at 2. Right.
We were gonna stop at 2. We were gonna stop at 2, and then we had 3. And I remember my wife found out she was pregnant with 3 because we both laid on the kitchen floor and sobbed. It's because we had 2 little ones at that point too. And we're like, oh my god, how are we gonna do this? Anyway, and now we moved. So we moved to a new house. I live in the middle of nowhere. I don't like it. There's an interior designer over here now, spending money faster than we can make it.
But it is for your office, so you shouldn't be complaining. It's about your new
I don't
office.
mind that part, but she's doing the whole thing. So I love my children. Don't get me wrong. I absolutely, they're the best thing that could ever have happened to me personally. I just some days are easier than others. So my son told his friends at school, he's 7, he told his friends at school that his dad was famous because he's on YouTube. And I said, I don't want to disappoint him yet. He's not ready for that level of disappointment.
He's too young.
I said, oh, cool. Cool. Just wait till you grow up and realize what your dad actually does for a living. Okay. Let's get in.
It's a flex, though. It's a flex, being on the playground saying, my dad is on YouTube. What does your dad do?
My dad's not on YouTube, but, Anyway, okay. We're going to talk about components of identity systems for a little bit this morning. That's right, Bull. I don't want to disappoint him and tell him, no, it's not YouTube, it's Twitch, son.
We'll archive them in a couple of years so people won't have access to them. If that's
I hope that when... So the last thing I'll say. So when they were all born, I went and created email addresses for them. And every so often, we will send them an email for them to see later, like for them to read later when they're grown up, And just like, hey, you did this today, or hey, you were really driving me bananas today, or like today you took your first step, or today you did your first thing, or whatever. And it just seemed like a cool way to, know. Anyway, okay. Let's talk about identity systems and pieces of them. So, first thing, so we got 4, and these aren't really components per se. These are the 4 pieces, the 4 pillars of identity and access management. So you see IAM used a lot, identity and access management. You'll see CIAM, consumer identity and access management. Ultimately, it's all the same thing, right? So these are the sort of main things that an identity system needs to cover for you, and that you either need to create yourself or that ideally you want your identity system to do for you, right? So we got 4 of them: authentication, authorization, administration, and auditing. And sometimes the A's are kind of different. Sometimes they change, and people have slightly different names for them. But ultimately, these are the things that our IAM systems need to go and deal with. So if we look at what each one of those things is responsible for, on the authentication side, that's where we're looking at things like protocol implementation. So this is the thing that... You're right, I did forget the 5th A. Bolt, the programmer. Authentication is everything all about getting you signed in. So this is, how do I know who you are? And if we start to walk backwards from how does the user sign in, then we get into, okay, well, how do we know the user is who they say they are? Well, that typically comes down to like credentials, right? So we've got the most basic, a username and password. And of course, that's exploded in recent years. Now we've got usernames and passwords. We have one-time passwords that you get emailed, or you have an app on your phone that does MFA and gives you a token that you can use to sign in, or you use your face to sign in, with your phone or on your computer. There are all sorts of things now that make up authentication. And so the credentials is sort of an umbrella term of something that proves to the remote system that you are who you say you are, right? And there's a ton of work in that. And in fact, we spend a whole lot of time talking there because in some ways that is one of the more relevant parts for developers, especially developers just trying to get work done. Like, I just need to build my app. Authentication is one of the first things that they have to do, right? And so that's why we spend so much time sort of on that topic. But the second step to that is when we look at authorization. So authentication is who you are, and authorization is what can you do? What are you allowed to do? And that could mean, what are you allowed to do in the app? It could also mean, what are you allowed to do in the system itself? And that's a much more business and domain specific question. So how we authenticate you, whatever. There are industry standards all over the world for how to do that, and there are lots of non-standard things that are super popular, like usernames and passwords. Authorization gets a little bit trickier because if, as the author of an identity system, or as an architect of an identity system, you've got to figure out, okay, how do I build a system that's flexible enough, that's also usable enough that it doesn't take forever and a day to get it implemented, but also isn't so complex that nobody implements it because they can't, right? So you can't cover everything. Yeah, so it's very much an 80-20 sort of a thing. But so the authorization parts of those systems are the things that handle things like entitlements. What are you allowed to do? And you, in this case, could mean you, the user, but it could also mean you, the app that you're building. Or it could mean a combination of the both. It could mean you, the app, you, the user, who is using a specific application. So those two things combined may generate a specific level of authorization, and it might be different depending on what kind of app you're using. Excuse me. So So authorization itself is okay. Well, the developer needs to define the entitlements, but then we also need to get users into them, and that's what gets us into our sort of administration side. Is okay. Well, how do we do all this stuff? How do we create new users? How do we create roles? How do we do all the work that we need to do to support authorization and authentication? And JML is something you'll hear a lot: joiners, movers, leavers. So these are people who are joining the identity system, joining a directory per se. People who are moving around, right? So, I started at Microsoft 5 years ago, actually. So it was 5 years Monday. So I started 5 years ago. And since I've been here, I've worked in 3 different jobs, right? And my level of access to various things, my entitlements have changed considerably since I started, right? No, that was not the announcement. That was not the announcement, Bolt. No. But so my moving around inside of the company, my access has changed. The things I'm allowed to do have changed. The kinds of prerequisites that I need in order to gain that kind of access have changed too. So there are all sorts of reasons why people move around and do different things, and every one of those moves has some sort of implied change to access level or to maybe even authentication strength, right? You see a lot of work being done right now around frontline workers. So people who are working in a shop somewhere, at a restaurant, in a truck, people who are out in the community to do their job. And frontline workers, their job is not sitting in a computer all day. Their job is doing a task, like a thing, all day that generally doesn't involve sitting in front of a computer, which means their phone or some other kind of small handheld device becomes way more important to getting work done. So the kind of experience that a frontline worker has in terms of how they sign in and how they access resources may be very different from someone who sits at a computer all day, right? And not to mention somebody working in finance is going to have different access to different kinds of data than somebody in, say, in HR or in frontline. And so we have to figure out what happens to both your entitlements and then also how you sign in based on what you're doing inside the company. I mean, a place I used to work before I came here, there were like 5 different subsidiaries in the United States alone. And as you switched to each one, they were very sort of hard firewall in between each one of them. And so when you moved, you were almost starting up with a new company. Even though your inbox stayed the same and all that sort of stuff, the things that you had access to changed a lot. And then, of course, there are leavers. So what happens when somebody leaves? What happens when you leave the company? Well, we need to make sure your access is shut off. We need to make sure that the right people still have access to the stuff that you may have had access to before. Because how many times has somebody left and like a week later a build starts failing? Or customer sends you a note and says, hey, Carl was talking to me about this, but his email's kicking back. What do I do, right? So you think about all the different things that happens when somebody leaves, and how do we make sure we understood what they had access to before so that we can make sure that whatever access they had before is conferred to the right people when they leave, So like
also the fact that you have to remove access from the people that leave,
right.
Because I've been in scenarios where companies would still have things running in production, and 2 years later, people still had access to the admin portals because obviously they were not using an identity provider. They had hard-coded usernames and passwords, and that can be an issue if you allow access to somebody that has left the company to still have access to these resources.
Yes, there's a place I worked a long time ago, and they had it was a construction management firm. So they hired subcontractors to do the actual construction work, but they managed the projects, right? So there was a project, a construction project, and every month they had a window of time that these construction projects could report performance. How close to budget are they, and are they on time, all that sort of stuff. So every month they did this, and it was like you had like a week or 2 long window to get your reports in. Right? Because then at the end of the window, they'd close the window, and then a bunch of processing would take place, whatever, right? Well, one of the devs on our team retired. He'd been at the company for a really long time. He retired. Cool. See ya. Great. Good luck on your retirement, blah, 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 blah. Well, the following month rolls around, and we get an email in our inbox for the dev team that says, hey, so Joe had this tool that we used to open up the window. We can't find it. Do you guys know where it is? And we had never even heard of it. We didn't even know it was there, right? So it was a tool that, just a one-off tool that somebody had built that over time, this sort of big critical business process had been built around. And so we had to scramble to figure out what it did. I mean, we had to go interview people to understand what it did and everything else. And it was, and meanwhile, we were 3 days before the window needed to open. So like it was totally crazy. So somebody leaving is in many ways far more important and disruptive potentially than somebody joining. Because when you join, you don't have any history of the company or whatever.
Indeed.
You may bring some stuff with you, but at the end of the day, when you're leaving, who's going to get access to your mailbox? Who's going to get access to your OneDrive or your Box or your Dropbox and all that sort of stuff? Because you don't have access to it anymore. And so what kind of access did you have before? And that's the kind of stuff that we need to deal with when we talk about joiners, movers, and leavers in particular. And then the last big pillar is auditing. So with auditing, it all comes down to knowing exactly what's happening at any given point and being able to go back and see that over time, right? There's immediate stuff that happens, and some of it's automatic now. Right, it's 2021, 2020. We've gotten to the point where a lot of things we can use automated decision making for. Things like, oh, you signed in from Europe and the United States 5 minutes apart from each other. So maybe your credentials have been, your credentials have been compromised, right?
Or maybe you're Superman or Superwoman.
But then, you start looking at the more advanced threats that are coming down and the kinds of things that people are doing where they may steal a credential and sit on that credential for months. Or they may steal a signing certificate and use that signing certificate to actually issue valid tokens, right?
Oh, so that reminds me of something.
What?
Was that not SolarWinds?
I mean, I don't want to say the name, but ultimately, the kinds of attacks are getting much more complex, and they're much more
sophisticated.
Much more sophisticated. That's a great way to put it. Because if your tools aren't as sophisticated as the kinds of attacks, and of course they never are, it's always cat and mouse, right? If your tools are not as sophisticated, and in particular your auditing and your administration, if those tools aren't sophisticated enough, as sophisticated as your attackers, it makes it very easy to slide under. You think like, oh well, we see that this user has signed in at the same time from the same geographic location for the past 6 months. Well, another one coming in looking like that isn't going to raise a flag, right? But then maybe you go and you look a little bit deeper into it, and suddenly you start to see that maybe there's some extra properties or the apps that they're signing in with, or some additional property that exists on that login or on that token issuance that isn't exactly what you would expect, right? But if you don't have a way to log that and then go back and look through it quickly, right? I mean, think about a place like a Microsoft, maybe even a smaller place. Let's take a smaller place, a 20,000 employee place, right? Think about how many times you log in every day. Think about how many times, maybe not how many times you actually type your credentials, but how many times are tokens being issued every day? I mean, I've got my cell phone that connects to my Outlook and OneDrive and all that stuff, and Teams and whatever. I've got a desktop that sits in front of me. We've got laptops, and people have all sorts of different things. Not to mention we've got apps that are running. We've got servers that are running. So you think about how many times things get. If you think about how many times things get tokens get issued on a typical day, I mean it's millions, right?
Yeah.
Even for a place with 20,000 employees, and if you can't look through that data in a reliable manner quickly, you're going to be totally overwhelmed, right? You can't look through a log file and make sense of that sort of stuff. And so I think that's where we see more and more and more advanced tools, because we have more and more and more advanced adversaries who are out trying to get credentials and everything else. So auditing what happens when, ultimately, if you can't audit, it's just too much of a risk. If you can't know what's happening in that system at any given time, it's almost DOA, right? Just because there's just not a good there's just not a good future for that, right?
And you need massive automation and machine learning on these things, because, as you said, with the amount of data, there's no way to manually produce the logs every day to see if there's something dodgy. So having a system that can do it for you rather than doing it with you is very important, especially as the data grows.
Like not being able to clear the logs, for example. If it's a right, you know, like, well, like Robertables just said, controlling access to the logs is super important because
Yes.
if I go in and do a bunch of stuff and then I can go in and clear out the logs that showed that I just did all that stuff, then what's the point, right? Mm-hmm. And then Bolt's point of people keep logs forever. They keep logs for ages. And that's great for machine learning. It's not great for, well, you know, Joe, he signed into his PC, his Windows CE field tablet in 1997 from this IP. Yeah, and we haven't seen it since. So I don't know where, you know, maybe something's wrong with his machine. You know, like that kind of stuff. Like keeping those logs forever it's really only good for training other systems that are going to go and analyze your logs for you.
Exactly.
And then there was one other question too, or one other comment, I guess, from El Capitan Squirrel about mobile devices. And so I switched from iPhone to Android a few years ago. And it's fine. I mean, it is what it is. There is Android Work Profile, which is like
he's going to go into that front again. Go on. I give you permission.
No. Here's the thing about Android Work Profile. It solves the problem that El Capitan Squirrel mentioned, which is having to join your whole. When you join a personal phone onto a network, right, or into a company, you end up in a case where you get. Your whole phone is now managed by your company. And they can go and plow through it whenever they would like and delete everything, wipe everything, whatever. Mm-hmm. Which is not a terribly good user experience. Imagine you're out doing work and suddenly your phone gets wiped because somebody thought your phone was at risk or something. So, I mean, there's an advantage to it too, though, of course, which is if you leave your phone in a cab or something or your phone gets stolen, the whole thing is now plowed, and it doesn't really matter. Yes. But so Android phones now have this Android Work Profile, and they just started rolling it out at work, like, I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago. Mm-hmm. It's miserable. It separates your stuff. So if the admin does a remote wipe, it only wipes the work side. Yeah. So, like, that part is good in the sense that my stuff doesn't get wiped out, but which on the surface sounds really good. It's a good intention, right? The road to hell is paved in good intentions. It's a good intention. The problem is now you have to install every app twice because you install it in personal profile and you install it in work profile, and then only certain apps are available in work profile. And so you want to copy and paste from one to the other. You can't do that. You want to open a file like I tried to open a text file the other day that somebody emailed, like somebody had emailed a log file. I couldn't open it. Because I don't
find
have
an app, or you couldn't open it.
I don't have anything in Work Profile that can open it. Since it got emailed to me, that file can't leave Work Profile. So I was like, what do I do? So I ended up uploading it to OneDrive or Dropbox or somewhere, and then re-downloading it. So, you know, but
it's fun.
Robertables makes another good point, which is, well, just don't use your personal phone, and I think that's. I have not worked at a place in a long time that would buy anybody a phone. The last place I worked at,
I know. Yeah.
The last place I worked where they bought me a phone was 2010, and it was a BlackBerry.
I got a Windows phone when I joined Microsoft.
But I think the thing is, like, the reason they gave us BlackBerries was because nobody would have carried one independent, like, on their own. And so, I mean, they had like belt clips and stuff. I mean, we're talking like 2007, 2008, 2009 kind of time, right? Anyway,
the pinnacle of the BlackBerry era, right? Or it's when they started dying out, because 2007 was the iPhone introduction.
I quite liked my BlackBerry, to be quite honest. Like, it worked well, and the little keyboard was perfect for typing. So, but you know, it was also 2009, 2008, 2010, like. Your expectations...
You were young and you didn't know better. That's it.
Well, that's true. But your expectations were also quite low. I had an HTC Wizard. It was a Windows Mobile 5 phone.
Yes.
And I remember it because the data plan cost an absolute fortune back then. But you could slide the whole thing up. Like, the screen would slide up.
I always wanted one of them. They were not very popular in the U.S. Sorry, outside the U.S.
Yeah.
So we didn't have the slider phones that you could slide up. Man.
Yeah.
Those were the days.
And H3 Tech says BlackBerry security was ahead of the curve, and for a long time it really was. I mean,
Was
you know,
true.
I don't think I think BlackBerry now is just a manufacturer of
Of Android phones.
Android phones. Like
Yeah.
somebody the other day said, BlackBerry is not the same BlackBerry they were 10 years ago. Maybe that's true. I don't know. Okay. So anyway, so if we look at the pieces that we just had, we start thinking about like what do we actually have to do, right? So your directory is sort of your main store. The directory is the thing where we're going to put all this data, and that's the thing where you're going to do all of your primary work, because you can kind of think of it as being your database. So that's your directory. Your directory is just the database that happens to have all of your identity related stuff in it. It's a sort of, it's actually in some ways kind of an old name. It's a name that's been around for a really long time, and it doesn't. It may not actually be that relevant in today's parlance. It's just a term that's been around for a long time. Back when the directory was literally a list of users, right? So when you think about it, okay, so we've got our store. We got to store some data. And that's when we get into like all the questions. So we start thinking backwards, like, okay, well, I've got users. Well, how do I store my user data? How do I know my? How do I store the users, just the users' data themselves, right? But then, how does the user join? How does a user end up in our directory? Is that something like? And we have to answer that question today. So, in an org, how does a user become a member of an organization? How do they get an account at work? Usually, it's by getting they've got a job, or they get a job, or they're working like contract or vendor or something. But somehow or another, there's some human process that happens of, okay, well, we have a user that comes in. But that's different from, say, a startup, a Stripe, Dropbox or something like that, where I just need to sign up. So if you're going to go build your own app for the internet, well, I want self-service sign up. I don't want users to have to call me first and tell me they want to join. I should just be able to capture that information from them. But then we have to figure out what are their credentials. So storing a username and password, there are lots of different ways to do it, and there are lots of really good ways to do it and lots of really bad ways to do it. But at the end of the day, you don't want to store a password if you don't have to. But because passwords are becoming sort of, they're starting to become that, they're not the first thing that people want to use nowadays. What do we do about the enrollment of these other devices? Maybe enrollment in the sense of, not so much of like enrollment as we know it in the IT world of, well, you have an enrolled device, but how do I enroll a credential? How do I use my FIDO key, or how do I use my Face ID on my phone to go and sign into resources, right? How do we do that? So that's something else that we got to go figure out. Computer accounts, like what do we do with our computer accounts of the devices themselves? So historically, if you type your password in the chat, it'll replace it with stars. Here, I'll use mine right now. I just typed mine. No, I'm just kidding. Don't do that.
There are a couple of interesting questions. For example, Zulu King saying, when the user wants to change their personal information, is it okay to update via an API, or does it have to be via SSR? I think self-managing accounts is very important, especially for larger orgs, because otherwise support would be spending most of their time dealing with Microsoft accounts. With their Azure AD accounts, and you don't want that to be the case. You want a system where you self-manage your accounts.
Yeah, I think a lot of it depends on your org, and some of it depends on what a user can and can't do. Like some of it might be, you can update your your street address because you moved. Okay, well that makes sense. You could update something, but maybe you can't, because maybe updating your street address means your tax info changes, and now HR has to go change something. Like it's a very work specific thing. But if it's a personal thing, right? If I go and change my address on my on a DoorDash account, well, I should probably be able to do that without calling somebody first. You know what I mean? So some of it just depends on the context of the app and how important those specific pieces, those specific fields are to the business problems that you're trying to solve. My address matters very little to, say, a forum that I'm a member of, but my address is very important at work, and it's very important for Amazon delivery. You know what I mean? And so maybe the bar, the level of verification or validation that you go through to change an address might be different in different scenarios depending on what you do. I think we'd like to fall back to SSR, self-service management of that in almost all cases, unless it is something that your business is going to fail or your business systems are going to fail, or if they're ripe for abuse. So if it's the kind of service where somebody could go and change their name to look like somebody else, or to mimic somebody else, or to impersonate somebody, or to impersonate somebody, an existing well-known user, for example, that may not be something that you want your app to support, because that may open up the door to abuse, right? So, a lot of it depends on context. Like, we can change our Twitch username once every 90 days or something, or 60 days. And that makes sense, because you wouldn't want to assume somebody else's identity, and you wouldn't want to be able to do it so quickly that you could just be abusive and then go change your username and nobody knows who you are. So I think a lot of that comes down to what your specific business domain is going to look at. So anyways, we've got our users. We got to store them somehow. In addition to our users, we also have devices and computers. Like, we have things that people use to access these services, and since we want to control those tend to be part of the IAM systems as well. But then we get into, okay, I want to now got to access these apps. So on the one side, hey, Rick VD Bosch, good to see you again. On the one side,
Rick, he said the last time. Come on, man.
Oh, just Rick. Well, I don't want to call people by their names. They that's the name they chose to say. That's the name
I know,
they chose to
but
put
he
out
gave
to
us
the world.
permission to use Rick, so we'll be personal.
I missed that. Hey, Rick. Good morning, Rick. The other thing, though, is we've got these apps. So we've gone through all this work of getting users and passwords and all these sort of things added into our directory, and that's cool. So now our users can log in, but what can they log into? They need to log into something. They need to log into an app. They need to log into a PC. They need to log into a device. They need to log into something, right? So we have to provide a user. We have to provide users and developers with ways to build applications. And then how do we have to have the application trust our identity system in two directions. One, I need users to be able to come in and sign in. So one of those is just sort of a, hey, I'm over here. I have an application. I need to sign in. Typical client app, right? A mobile app that sits on your phone, a front-end web app, that sort of thing. I just need to know who you are. And those are typically referred to as clients. So a client app is something that is accessing or using the identity system. So there are also resources, though. And a lot of times clients and resources are the same. So a resource typically is like an API or some kind of a service that owns and holds data for the purposes of servicing an app, right? So you can let's think of Outlook. So Outlook, the mobile app, right? Like, so the Outlook app that sits on your cell phone, that's a client app. The Outlook app on your phone does not provide service to anything else. It only works on your phone, so it is purely a client. It, however, uses another app, which is the backend API for Exchange and Office 365. Exchange and Office 365, in that sort of analogy, those are the resources. Now, to the identity system, they're all apps. They're all clients, and they're all resources. But the line between the two is around which of these things are purely accessing data as pure clients, and which of these things are purely servicing data as in pure resources. And very few apps are pure in either direction. So usually what you end up with is a single app that may be a client of certain things and may also be a resource where it provides data to other things, right? So let's take a typical front-end web app with a back-end API, right? So I've got a back-end API that sells business cards, and that back-end API needs to let me manage my profile, and I need to place orders, right? That back-end API needs to publish what you can do to it, right? So you'll notice we have listed defined scopes. So typically that backend API is the thing that's going to define the scopes that exist for itself, and those are groups of functionality, right? So let's say our scope for our backend thing is profile.read for reading the user's profile, and then orders.read for reading the user's orders. right? So by publishing those two scopes, the developer has said, hey, these are two discrete pieces of functionality that my API can service. One is reading the user's profile, and one is reading the user's list of orders, right? So by defining those scopes, they're now telling the identity system, hey, other applications can now access that data, right? So by saying that the other ones can access that data, now we're in a place where I can go build my own front-end web app. Say I want to build my own web app for managing my orders. Well, I can do that now because I can build a net new client, a new client app, and that new client app can use those resources. Similarly to my phone, right? I've got a mobile app that lets me manage my orders, and that mobile app is the client app that talks to the resources. And so by talking to the resource, we need those clients to be able to say, hey, I need access to resource 123. I need access to the read orders permission that this resource publishes, right?
Yep.
Beyond that, now the user also needs to say, yeah, I want to let this happen. And that's when we get into consent. So in consent, that's when we're looking at a user saying, yeah, I want to allow my mobile app to talk to my order API and access my data as me, right? And so consent is another whole collection of things that you as the identity system owner that you have to manage, own, control, configure, whatever. And so we end up in a place where it isn't just sign in with usernames and passwords. There are a million other things that need to happen. So the one other thing I want to show you is this picture. Now, this is a picture of the Azure AD components. Now, bear in mind, Azure AD does a whole lot of stuff that is related to the things that are on the screen right now, but it does other stuff too.
It comes with a warning.
What comes with the warning?
The design.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and warn you now. It's it takes a lot to run Azure AD. So, oh, this slide builds. I don't like building slides. I think it's very like the slides that build up like this. So this is actually a fairly old slide. But if you look at this, these are all of the things that make up Azure AD, right?
Imagine if the circle went inside as well, and almost like a snail.
Oh, wait till you get to the next. Wait till you get to the next one. Wait till you get to the next one. So these are all the pieces that make it up, and you can go through and look at all the different ones. In fact, there may be even more pieces now, right? But so you go through here and you look, and you're just like, all of these things support those 4 root things, right? Mm-hmm. All 4 of them, they support those 4 pillars: authentication, authorization, administration, and auditing. That's what these things all do, and they do that with the bulk of the data that's stored down here in this root thing, right? Now, if you liked that slide, I have one more for you. Why do I hear myself?
What do you change?
I literally didn't change anything. I don't know what happened. I hope nobody else can hear me twice too.
Make it stop.
Anyway.
Oh.
So when you look at this is how all these different systems sort of talk to each other, right? So it's incredibly complex to build one of these kinds of systems, right? Because there's so many components, they all need to talk to each other. And there are so many different things that need to happen. If you look down here in the corner, you see there's things like access management, authorization, device management, password management. All of these things that are sitting down here in the bottom corner are all part of those original 4 A's in delivering a service that covers those 4 A's. So if you don't want to build this on your own, I'd suggest using an external identity provider. Doesn't need to be this specific external identity provider, but I would suggest that you use an external one. So on that note, I'm going to stop presenting here. And we're going to switch over and take a look at a couple things. It looks like our guest is here.
Yeah,
We'll
hey.
get him on here in a minute. I think that's why I hear my voice again.
Oh,
Makes
yes.
sense, though.
OBS Ninja maybe is messing up with us?
I don't know.
And you fixed it. You fixed it!
Well, I fixed it for me.
Oh, you know what? I think maybe Damien just...
I muted him for a moment. So
Oh, you
that
muted
was
him.
why.
Okay.
Okay, so let's go look at an actual example of what some of those things on that slide look like, right? So I get my thing up here, get my portal up here. So when we talk about a directory, we talk about Azure AD. So Azure AD as a directory is sort of the overarching thing that holds all this sort of data, right? If I'm a developer, I'm interested in clients and resources. So let's go look at clients and resources. So if I'm in my directory, and this is Azure AD, but this is going to be the same for virtually any directory service. If you use Identity Server, if you use a, if you use, an Okta, an Auth0, any of the other, Ping, whoever, they're all going to have similar, a lot of this language is going to be somewhat similar. So we call them app registrations. And an app registration is a way for us to say, I've got a client or I've got a resource, right? So let's register a new app. And we'll just call this, let's see, I'm going to call this a pure resource. It doesn't need access to anything else. It only needs to serve out its data to other services. So, we'll create this, whatever. We'll give it a redirect URI. So we've got this, register this up. So now we've got our pure resource. So in here, we're going to expose an API. These are the scopes that we talked about just a minute ago. So I'm going to add a scope, and we'll call this, let's see, we'll call this a pure resource slash, what did we say? Orders.read. Oops, that's my app ID. So that's my app ID. Let's add a scope called orders.read, right? So who can do this? Who can consent to this, right? Who's going to allow this to happen? We'll say admins and users, because this is to read users. This is to let a user do it, so why not, right? Allows the user to, or allows the app to read the user's orders, right? And then, because the user can also do this, allows the app to read your orders, because you're a user. So we're going to add this scope. And by adding this scope to the resource, we are now saying as a developer, hey, I've got to know when a user comes in and they've got orders.read, like I need to know how to handle that. I need to know what to do with that, right? Bolt, I changed the application ID URIs because I see so many GUIDs every day that I don't want to see extra ones if I don't have to. That's really what it comes down to, because I always get confused. You don't have to change it. You can change it, whatever. It does make your scopes a little bit easier to put into config files and to see them and look at them and know exactly what they are immediately, which is helpful. So I'm going to expose this scope, and we're going to expose the other one too, which was profile.read, because that was the other thing that we wanted to allow other apps to do. So we'll do profile.read. I'll just put profile.read here again because we all know what that means. You can read your profile, right? So we're going to add this scope. So now this is just a resource app, right? So these are the two scopes that we're going to allow other applications to use in order to access our data. So now let's go back. We're going to create a new registration. This one we're going to call a pure client. This is going to be just a client app. So we're going to register our client app. And here, instead of exposing an API, because our client is not a resource, instead, we've got API permissions. And in here, this is where we're going to say, I'd like to consume that resource. I'd like to connect to our pure resource API and get the user's order data. So let's add a permission. We'll look here under My APIs. And somewhere in this list, we have a pure resource. And if we look, we've got delegated permissions, which means user. We'll talk about permissions a little bit on a different day. But we've got these delegated permissions here. So these are permissions that are coming from a user that a user is going to allow us to access their data, not all data. So I'm going to check these two, and we're going to say, yeah, I want orders.read and profile.read, and we're going to add those permissions. So now what we've said to Azure AD or to the identity system is we're saying, hey, we've got a client called a pure client, and that client represents, we'll say for today, a mobile app, right? That client app needs access to read orders and read profiles from this other resource called a pure resource. So this is why when we talk about spas and backends and spas with front end or spas with backend APIs, that's why we say, well, you kind of in a purist mode, you have to register two apps, because in theory or in practice, really, you have two apps. You have a client app and a backend. even if they're exactly the same and they only serve a single purpose, they're still technically two separate applications. And there's a larger discussion around should you reuse app IDs and that sort of thing when it's a front end, back end that are married together. But we'll skip that for today, and I'd be happy to talk about it in Discord or whatever. But
Yep.
the largely speaking, though, if you've got an API, that API may service multiple different applications, right? It may service a client app that runs on your mobile phone. It may service a web app that runs somewhere. It may service a TV app if you're running like a TV streaming service, right? Like you have all these different form factors that people might want to access your data on. And you may also want to let third-party developers do it. So you may want to say, you may say, you know what? We don't have a good interface for managing orders or managing bulk orders in bulk, we'll say, but we do have an API. We're going to let other people go and build that for us. So by having that API, now we need a way for people to generate clients. The other side to this, let me go back to let's go back to our resource thing. So the other side to this, is we have a pure resource, right? So we've got our resource API. The resource API is just here for, the resource API is just here for publishing data. But let's say our requirements change, and now I also need to go talk to, say, the Graph or Azure or something. I also need to go talk to the Graph to go do other work as the user. Like maybe part of what we want to do is I want to pull in some of the users' calendar data so they can choose a shipping date, right? So we'll choose a calendar, and now I can read the user's calendar. So now my resource app that is a pure resource is no longer a pure resource because now it's also a client. It's a client of the Graph, but it is a resource to other services, right? So there are, it gets very confusing or very muddy very quickly because you have this sort of root type of an app, and an app has lots of different factors and lots of different flavors and things that it can fit in, or facets, maybe that's the best way to look at it, because depending on what perspective you're coming from to look at that app, it may be a client, it may be a resource, or it may be a blend of both. Okay, so I'm going to answer a couple questions, then we're going to turn off Learn TV. If you like what you're seeing,
Yes.
we've got Damien coming on here in just a couple of minutes. He's going to talk to us about tokens. He's going to kind of do a deep dive on access tokens and all the different tokeny things inside of Azure AD, which is going to be really great. Well, we're going to have some folks from our internal team come on a little bit later on too. So if you'd like, come and join us over on Twitch at 425 Show. Be sure to join Discord, that sort of thing. Okay, so Sahil. Sahil says, GCC High, new Azure AD policy commands don't work to adjust custom tokens. When does GCC High support this? I don't know. We'll have to look. We'll have to look at the roadmap and see. I don't know if I don't know what's on the current roadmap for GCC and for GCC High, because I know there's some changes and things, whatever. And GCC typically is sort of somewhat of an Office 365 designation, but we will look and see. If you want, send us an email so we can keep track of it, please, and we'll find the right people. Okay, so that's Identity Crisis episode 4 for today. We're going to take a break. We're going to turn off Learn TV. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to get Damien in the building, and
Sahil.
And we'll be back in just a few minutes. And thanks for hanging with us. Be right back.
Yeah, thank you.